Good morning. Thanks for joining us at another Graphiant webinar. Today, we're honored to have Roy Chua, founder and principal analyst at AvidThink, join us to talk a little bit about the new middle mile, or really the rise of what's being termed Carrier NaaS. Roy, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Matt, for the invitation. Pleasure's all mine.
Why don't we start off? I know we've been working together for a few years now, and discussing what the middle mile is and what the middle mile needs to become. But for the viewers of the webinar, why don't we go into a little bit about how you see the middle mile, how you see the middle mile, changing and merging, and kind of where you see carriers going, being affected with that, and where the enterprise ties into that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thanks for the opportunity to share. Yeah, we're working hard on our report for this year. It's an update to the one last year. And I think, one of the things we're seeing is this evolution of the middle mile infrastructure and this network as a service that ties in, the first and the last mile. But let me explain what first and last mile is. So let's start. I think those are pretty straightforward. So we'll start with the last mile because a lot of people understand what it is. So the last mile is your wireline or wireless infrastructure that gives you connectivity to businesses and consumers, right? And that's all the way at the edge, right? So at your home, in your businesses, that last thing that you subscribe, your ISP, you pick your favorite ISP or your least favorite ISP, that's your last mile connectivity, right? So that's that. First mile is this backbone infrastructure, sort of global infrastructure that connects large regional data centers operated by generally these web scale businesses, right? So you can imagine your Googles, your AWSs, your Metas of the world, right? Those are the ones that are operating these large scale data centers. And also some of the large top tier carriers, right? They're operating this first mile, usually fiber infrastructure that connects large clusters of computing resources all over the world, right? That's first mile. And that includes connectivity across nations, subsea cables and the like. So that's the first mile and the last mile. So the stuff in the middle, which turns out to be really important, that's the middle mile, right? So, yeah,
Just to clarify, so that first mile and that middle mile, you really kind of see as fixed, right? Well, definitely the first mile we see as fixed. The last mile, like you said, whether it's 5G, 6G, you know, direct internet access, there's some flexibility there, but those technologies are pretty fixed.
they are pretty fixed. I mean, infrastructure first and last are sort of fixed, and the middle is interesting. The middle has got a whole mix of things, and some of this definition comes from actually the U.S. government itself, right? So it's things like leased dark fiber, inter-office transport, your backhaul for your carriers, which is the those links that take information from your towers and sort of move it back in the data centers and move traffic around. And so there's a whole bunch of these things around the middle mile that connect the different sites. And it also includes both wireless and wired infrastructure. So, your radio towers don't always use fiber. Sometimes they use a microwave link, to ferry that traffic back into a processing or aggregation site somewhere else, right? So that's that middle part of it. So what's the middle mile? It's stuff that's not the first mile. It's stuff that's not the last mile. It's the stuff in the middle, and the middle tends to be a bit more messy, right? Generally speaking, and why it would be messy. It would be messy. There's a lot of fiber in there. In fact, there's a lot of dark fiber in there as well. And some of the carriers, sometimes people jokes like actually they forget where they've buried all the fiber, and they've lost what they call route miles, right? Route miles of fiber have been lost over the years because the records are bad. So that middle mile truly is messy. And so in terms of the characterization of these networks, right? On the top end is like the hyperscalers, the clouds, right? The very large carriers in the world that deal with it. On the other side, it's very hyper local. It's edge, right? It's people, digging a trench to your home or your offices, right? People stringing up stuff, behind your house, that cable from your favorite MSO, multi-service operator, your cable operator that comes in. The middle part, as we said, is messy. It's hyper distributed, hyper fragmented. It's owned by many different parties, operated by many different parties, and so that's a little messy, but it is critical. It is very critical to carrying the traffic, because otherwise, how do you get your traffic from your last mile to your data centers, or how do you consume services if that middle mile is not ideal? in fact, we were talking to some of the carriers recently, and I know in the US, people, talk about sort of BEAD funding, governments trying to help drive, access, right, for, connect the unconnected, or, better serve the underserved. And they were pointing out that, hey, look, there's a lot of money available for the last mile elements, but very little for the middle mile. And it's like, so you can build all these wonderful little, high speed links, in your little city, but then you have no middle mile bandwidth to carry it to the data centers. That's not very useful. And so it turns out the middle mile is actually very important. And historically, there's not been a lot of focus, but I think that's changing. And part of it is that's why we've been writing this report and working with Graphiant, because that middle mile is really important. And so, we look at it from a network perspective. I'm a network guy. Matt is probably a smart network guy who
That's when I used to be smart. When we
now
had
you
all
just
those
network,
different
right?
groups is when I
Anyways,
used to be smart.
but as networking people, they're like, okay, all this connectivity, that's really important, right? And that's really wonderful. And I'll give you an MPLS link. I'll give you IPv6, SRv6. We talk it like that. And application guys are sort of looking at this and saying, wait, from an app perspective, I don't really care, right? I've worked very hard, to give you this full stack customer experience in the application. And on the consumer and business side, you're like, okay, yeah, I just want results, right? Fundamentally, can I stream Netflix? Can I stream Netflix at 4K, right? Is my Microsoft Teams going to work? Is my Zoom going to work, right? That's what they care about. Is this a network that you're giving me fast enough so I can run some control logic, in a site that's close to my factory, because I can't really put the compute stuff in my factory because it's too hot, right? Or I don't have space, or it's too dusty. That's what they want. They want outcome. They want results, and they want a network as a service. It's like, look, I use Salesforce as a service. I Netflix is a service, right? My Google Gmail is a service. Office 365 is a service. Just I don't really care about you're trying to explain to me this middle mile thing. I don't care. Just make it work. I don't want to be bothered with it. You just got to give me something that makes it work. And that's what we're hearing. We're hearing more and more of that from the consumers and enterprises. And no surprise, right? Historically, a lot of enterprises dealt with networking. They had the WAN group, they had the LAN group, they had the voice group, right? All these different groups with a lot of special. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, we used to, like, I want to talk to the WAN engineer, right? And the WAN, I mean, that's a different engineer from the LAN engineer, right? And so that's the way it used to be. But now, when we talk to enterprises, they're like, you know what? I don't really care, right? Just give me what I need. And what do they need, right? How do they talk to us? They don't talk about, MPLS or SRv6 or IPv6. Or they talk about, here are my workloads, right? Here are my workloads. I want collaboration to work, right? Or UCaaS, right? I want my streaming media to work. I want social media to work. Even from a carrier perspective, I want my 5G network to work, right? And I want my AR/VR headset to work. I want my IoT or industrial IoT, or or the Internet of Medical Things, right? If I'm in healthcare, I want that to work. And increasingly, what we're hearing is I want AI and Gen AI to work, and not just Gen AI, right? So that I can make some wonderful cat videos or write a poem about cats. But I also have like predictive AI. I use AI for surveillance, video surveillance. I'm using it for safety. I'm using it for control systems, right, in my factories or in my transportation network. Those are the workloads I care about, and I care that the network gives me what I need from a capacity, a performance, your latency, your loss rates. I care about those elements, right? And increasingly, what we're hearing as well is not just the performance characteristics, but the privacy, the security, and the policy compliance, right? We're hearing from enterprises that say, look, when I route my traffic through your middle mile, right, can you make sure it doesn't go through these countries ever, right? Things like that, right? That they actually care about, right? And so increasingly, they want an outcome. They want to apply a set of SLAs or QoS that you are supposed to give them. They don't care how it gets done. They care that it gets done, right? And then on top of that, there's other services in the network, right? Like network services or CDNs, DDoS blocking, other cybersecurity services that somehow need to be coordinated as part of this offering to the enterprises, right? That's how they talk. And And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Application workloads should drive networks. Historically, very often as network geeks, we're like, yeah, networks are important, right? You will run over my network. And the application's like, you know what? Guess who's most aligned with business needs and the line of businesses is the application, right? Network's important. They recognize that, but you're the tail, right? We're the dog, right? You're not, I mean, that's fundamentally what we're seeing. I mean, I don't know, Matt. Is that, I guess, that aligns with what you guys are seeing at Graphiant?
Absolutely. I mean, you nailed it on the head. The application and the application owners are closest to the business. They are, when you talk about enterprises, the applications are closest to the business. And we see, there's certain things that drive business. Save money, make money, and keep you out of the headlines. And what we see is the applications are the things that make money for the business. So they are closest to the business. So they very much drive a lot of the policy, a lot of the decisions. And a lot of times, we see the network people just told, make it work. Like you said in an earlier slide, you know, I don't care. It just needs to work. Why does it matter to me?
Yep. And so, yeah, I mean, so they say, make it work, which means I want nowadays a lot of them make it work, and because of the cloud and SaaS, is like, yeah, give it to me as a service. And so, you know, what the carriers are saying, and the people who own that middle infrastructure are saying, okay, look, if I can give you network as a service in a way that's programmable, so that you can interact with it, that's dynamic, flexible, and secure, because you need all that, right? Then maybe we'll succeed in meeting the enterprise needs, right, in terms of the offering. And on the carrier side, the carriers looking at this and saying, yeah, how do I, with the assets that I have, right, and with maybe my partners, how do I create my network as a service, and how do I make it consumable and palatable to the enterprises and the other organizations that want to consume it, right? How do I make it usable and useful? And I know that many of the carriers that we talk to, in fact, are in this spot right now. I mean, they're looking at it, they're talking about it, they're thinking about it, and that's part of why we've been writing a report and talking to them and engaging them, because it is sort of that next level of abstraction, if you will, to the enterprises, right? I'm not going to sell you these complex network, SLAs or QoS or things which are too complicated. I'll sell you an outcome. I'll sell you an outcome, and I'll give you a way to consume it that's just as easy as what you consume on the application side, on the cloud. Right? That's what they're looking at, and that's what we're seeing, and that's hence the interest in network as a service.
And that's, that goes back. So that's where you reverse my enterprise description earlier. So when you look at the providers, the network is what drives top line revenue. So building these services, building this network as a service that's easy to consume, that the enterprise application guy really just, he doesn't care about, it just works. They just make it work, drives top line revenue for them. So do you see, so I think you're very familiar with, what the large providers are doing, and kind of what those tier one, I think we describe them as tier one providers are doing in that space. Do you see like tier two or regional providers moving into this space and pushing to offer these services to their customers?
I do. I do. Some of them are more innovative, and we've been talking to them for a couple of years, and they've been trying to build it. The ones that went early, I mean, I'll be honest, it was difficult for them. They didn't know how to achieve that easily. And I think, historically, if you try to build this, a lot of them were building with sort of very physical assets, right? Physical routers, and a lot of the orchestration automation weren't quite there yet. So there was a lot of heavy lifting. So the early ones who did that, found it hard. The tier twos, because the tier ones usually have a lot more sort of shared resources, capable resources, a bit of more money to invest because they can amortize that over a much larger network and customer base. The tier twos have to be a lot more careful about how they invest and where they invest. Now, the customer need aren't different, right? I mean, the tier twos and tier ones very often, serve mid-price to up, the Fortune 500s or the Global 2000s. And so the customer's needs are the same, but for the tier twos, they have to be a bit more careful, a bit smarter about how they apply things. But I do see that there is a strong demand, not just the tier ones who are trying to build it out, but the tier twos trying to move towards what the enterprises are asking for. And again, we last year when we first launched the report, there was already early inklings of what the enterprises are pushing for. This year, I think the momentum's even more, right? The direction was correct last year. Momentum has gone up this year. I think that's a difference, right? So directionally, that was set last year. Momentum wise, we've been seeing that growth this year, and I expect that to continue into the next year as well. So there's a lot more interest in Carrier NaaS, right? Carrier Network as a Service, which is what enables that middle mile connectivity to be provided in a programmable, flexible, secure manner, right? And I'm also seeing at the same time, even for the tier twos, is they're looking for more policy or compliance. There's a lot of drivers around those things. And a lot of it has to do with the movement of data, especially now with AI and Gen AI. How do I move my data to the right places where I can actually do training? And then after the models are built, how do I move the models out to places where I can run the inferences and also move the data for inferencing? And looking for that flexibility, because AI, Gen AI is a little tricky, especially with Gen AI, is data centers are now being built and popping up in different places. And fundamentally, the low cost of power is what drives that data, right? So there is data gravity, but data gravity, I think, is sort of sucked in by low cost power, right? So data gravity is yeah, I mean, your data is sort of sitting there, but low cost power is a draw, right? So it sort of pulls things to data centers with lower cost power, just because of the the amount of power needs that Gen AI, even inferencing, right, tends to take. And so as this sort of move around, the enterprise is saying, okay, I need a lot more flexibility because look, my workloads are changing, they're shifting. These next gen workloads that are sort of AI centric are important. I need a network to be flexible. I need the capacity to move the data around. I need the flexibility to, I don't want to nail down, link. I need to be able to move that when I need to, because I'm going to look for the cheapest place, right? Or the place where maybe GPUs are available, right? I want my H100s, right? It's not available all the time, as we know, right? So, yeah.
So I'm gonna rephrase that. I'm gonna net that out, and I want to make sure that my thinking here is correct. Um, what you're saying is low power is going to drive where the LLMs are and where training data has to move to, but inference and the engine that runs that is going to be at the edge where the users are. So we have a challenge where the large language models can be they're going to pop up multiple places. They're going to pop up where power, space, cooling, and then even hardware availability is going to be key. And then we're going to need to build connectivity from the edge to be able. So this is where programmable, flexible, dynamic, and I would also add um, performant to this. Middle mile comes in. Okay. Did you did you did you see and I think I heard this last week that 3 Mile Island is coming back online and Microsoft is bringing it back online just to power their data centers.
It is. It is. It is. It is. It is. I mean, nuclear is an op. I mean, look, when Microsoft put that job listing for, like, I think it was a nuclear engineer, right? People, took that and like, oh, look, it's back. And I think nuclear power, the new generation of nuclear power, um, you know, looks like it's a viable option. And when some environmentalists actually align with nuclear power to the extent that you can deal with the waste, right? Um, it's actually greener potentially than fossil fuel. And so when you need that much power, there's very limited ways that you can get it. And nuclear looks like an option that all the hyperscalers actually have jumped on and are willing to back and drive. And so it's an interesting time where we need, it appears we need a lot more power to train more models because that's what we want as a society, and we believe that there are gains from that. And so I think that's definitely that. I think I would say we want to be cautious with Gen AI because every time you create a cat video with Gen AI, you actually raise the temperature of the Earth by, and I don't know, 0.0001 degrees centigrade, right? But anyhow, but if but I think, but what I would say is that I don't think Gen AI is going away. I think the reality is that all businesses are using it. And so our jobs as sort of networking, compute infrastructure people is to find a cost-effective way of bringing that to the enterprises that are looking for it. And part of it is that flexible network to allow the data to traverse to where it needs to be, whether it's for training or inference. It's got to happen in the right place. And it can only happen in the right place if the network is available to take the data and the models to the right places, whatever they may be, right? That's fundamentally what it's about. And it's not the only workload, right? Look, I mean, streaming media is not going away suddenly. Netflix and all the rest are still going to keep driving, and those CDNs are going to keep pumping stuff. But guess what? They're also served by the middle mile networks, right? And so NaaS is still important, even for those. Yeah, yeah, and so in terms of the speaking of traffic patterns and moving stuff to where they need to be, um, the topology is evolving. I mean, historically, a lot of networks were sort of traditional distribution network, right? You build downstream data, streaming media, consuming all of that. And increasingly, what we're seeing is the ability to move data around across different places, right? Endpoints and metro edge, right? Endpoints in major cloud data centers. That's a big traffic pattern right there. Endpoints of other metro peers, as you share data, in the other metro regions, or the businesses are sharing data and moving stuff around. And also to other locations, including remote sites in different countries or data sites in different countries. But you got to do that in such a way that's complying with policy, right? You don't want to route it through nations that you view as potentially risky to you, and so you got to make sure that whatever flexible network still does the right thing, right, with regard to the data paths. So so that you don't violate compliance or you don't put yourself at risk, your business or your nation at risk, so to speak. And so so I think what we're seeing is that flexibility that NaaS brings is valuable. That the traffic patterns are still changing. Look, I mean, if we were doing this maybe 18 months ago, I don't think the AI data patterns would be that predominant, that prominent, and now it is, right? And so in 2 years' time, will it change? Maybe, probably, right? But fundamentally, I think what's important is the technologies that that allow us to bring NaaS to the market, that virtualization, the disaggregation, the software-defined infrastructure, right? Those capabilities are important, right? And the rise of edge computing sites that you can run, virtual gateways and or software routers or whatever it is that you have to build your NaaS, right? Those are also important. And what I do see is that analytics, AI, ML, media processing capabilities are going to pop up in different locations. The network's going to have to bring the workloads to them and the results to the end user wherever they are. That's not going to change, and networks are going to get faster. I mean, that prediction is almost always right. You could say that every year and you'd never be wrong, right? It's going to go from 100 to 400, 800 to 1.6 to 3.2. Look, you could be smart, Matt. We could just have to say that, and we know it's going to be right, right? It's never going to go down, right? So that's pretty straightforward. And then the other part that we see that actually is overlooked is, when we work with a lot of different vendors and even the carriers, is a lot of times that orchestration and automation is not something I think about. And that's the fundamental thing. If you don't have automation and orchestration and you don't build it right, your OpEx is going to be crazy. It's just no way to make it work. And there is no NaaS. You can't build an as a service without orchestration and automation. It's not possible, right? And so I know I made it last point. That's a mistake. I should have made it the first point. But that, to us, when we talk to vendors, if they emphasize that first up, we're like, yeah, they got it, right? They get it. They understand what the challenges are, right? And so, but anyway, this is some of the technology trends that we've seen impacting NaaS that we'll be talking about, as well in this year's report and digging into it more. But it is happening. I mean, yeah,
So just two questions I want to drill down on two different subjects. Um, from the orchestration and automation, absolutely, you're spot on. Key, everything has to be automated and has to be automated through and federated through additional tools. Um, but I always go back to the Bill Gates quote, right? If you automate an efficient process, you compound the efficiency. If you automate an inefficient process, you compound the inefficiency. So I would say automation done right and automation with the right underlying technologies is key there. And then the other bullet that I would touch on, and I would be interested just to get your just a real quick thought on before we close, um, with AI and ML, and with all of this data moving around, do you see data sovereignty challenges? Do you see challenges with harvest now, decrypt later, you know, data getting captured? And as we see the training engines moving to weird places, is there a recognition that we're going to have to be able to control based on a data type what path things take?
yeah. I think so. I think increasingly I'm hearing from the hyperscalers, the carriers, and the enterprises that they need a better idea of how the routes are set up. They want more certainty in terms of the routes. They want auditability from a compliance perspective. And you are correct, right? I mean, the 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 harvest now, whenever quantum computing, when we hit that particular day and it's available to, regardless of when it is, fundamentally people don't want the data, encrypted or not, going into places that they have no control, no visibility, or are worried about. And so we're hearing a lot of that. And I think to the extent that there is a way in the NaaS offering, I don't. I think it's going to be a policy for sure. Avoid X countries or avoid X regions will have to be a policy statement that you can apply to your NaaS API. I think that's just the reality going forward. There's no way around that. Just as you're asking for an SLA or QoS on those things, you say avoid country X, Y, Z.
Yeah, I think we agree with that. So thanks for the time today, Roy. Appreciate the discussion. If anybody wants to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you?
AvidThink.com. It's the easiest way to find us.
Excellent. I'm at Graphiant.com, so easiest way to find us as well. Thanks, Roy. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Matt.